The Council was the embodiment of civilization's apex, a coalition of species so ancient and powerful that the very concept of time seemed trivial to them. Their halls hovered above a dead star, an artificial fortress of unimaginable scale, where gravity bent and light curved to accommodate the weight of authority. Delegates from thousands of worlds, each representing empires that had survived millennia of wars, cataclysms, and cosmic upheavals, gathered in ceremonial convergence. The room itself seemed to pulse with power, the air thick with the history of countless conquests, alliances, and betrayals. Every being present carried the certainty of supremacy. Every eye was sharpened with centuries of arrogance. And yet, despite their mastery of strategy, diplomacy, and war, all shared a single blind spot: humanity. It began subtly, with a signal. Barely more than a ripple in subspace, faint and almost insignificant, it reached the Council's sensors. "Another human transmission," one delegate hissed, voice dripping with condescension. "Surely they are extinct. Their own history should have ended them long ago." The words were met with laughter, the kind of unrestrained arrogance that only comes from unchallenged certainty. "Perhaps they cling to existence like insects," another quipped, tentacles tapping against the polished crystalline railing. "But they are irrelevant. Let us not waste our time on relics of a species that survived by chance." And yet, across the silent void, the human signal continued to pulse, precise, deliberate, and patient. Something in it resonated beyond normal comprehension, a subtle disturbance threading through subspace itself. The Council dispatched small fleets to investigate, vessels equipped with technology centuries beyond anything humanity could muster, or so they thought. 3 armadas were sent, carrying warships that gleamed with exotic alloys, weapons capable of extinguishing entire worlds, and crews trained in the art of perfect coordination. Fleet admirals exchanged smirks and whispered dismissively about the humans, recalling centuries-old tales of primitive vessels, slow adaptation, and fragile bodies. "They will crumble under our first demonstration of power," one declared, fingers tracing the projected stellar map with supreme confidence. "It will be a matter of hours before we return and claim their systems," said another, his claws tapping impatiently. Yet, as these fleets crossed the boundary into human space, anomalies began to manifest. Navigational arrays faltered inexplicably. Subspace sensors distorted patterns beyond recognition. Communication signals carried subtle disruptions, encoded in mathematical sequences that no species had ever encountered, yet somehow conveyed meaning and intent. The humans did not respond with force. There was no fleet waiting in ambush, no bombardment of orbital platforms, no warning shots. The emptiness was deliberate, calculated, and horrifying in its implication. Pilots felt their ships hesitate, as if reality itself had paused, engines resisting commands, weapon systems becoming unresponsive. A sense of being observed permeated every sensor, every neural link, every instrument, an awareness that was everywhere, yet invisible, intangible, and absolute. Fleet commanders began to realize, with growing unease, that they were encountering something unprecedented. Ships appeared to occupy multiple coordinates at once. Battle formations shifted in impossible trajectories. Orders transmitted through the fleet's network returned delayed, altered, or non-existent. The systems that had once been reliable, the technology that had shaped centuries of warfare, faltered in ways that could not be engineered or explained. Pilots described glimpses of ghost fleets, vessels identical to their own, shadowing every movement, predicting every maneuver, and nullifying every plan before it could be executed. The arrogance that had defined the Council's fleets evaporated as the first reports of failure arrived back in orbit above the dead star. The Council itself was slow to comprehend the severity of the situation. Initial reports were dismissed as sensor errors, communication interference, or sabotage. But the pattern persisted. Scout vessels disappeared without trace, exploratory probes ceased functioning mid-transit, and even automated systems failed to reconcile the anomalies. A sense of disquiet settled over the delegates. Whispers replaced laughter, doubt replaced certainty. The Council, accustomed to controlling the fates of civilizations and dictating the rise and fall of species, faced the incomprehensible. Humans were not simply surviving, they were operating on a level beyond prediction, beyond engagement, beyond understanding. By the end of the first day of observation, the Council's laughter had vanished entirely. Their fleets, sent as instruments of reassurance and authority, were rendered immobile, trapped in loops of subspace that defied all comprehension. Pilots reported being in two places at once, seeing versions of themselves acting on impossible commands, unable to influence outcomes, unable to alter the course of events. Armadas that had been assembled with meticulous care and centuries of experience dissolved into a tableau of futility. The humans had not fired a single shot. They had not attacked. And yet the result was absolute. The Council's power, the fleets that carried centuries of pride, were neutralized with effortless inevitability. Across the galaxy, the first whispers of human inevitability began to spread. Fleet commanders, scientists, and observers marveled and recoiled at the impossibility. Enemy ships immobilized, systems untouched yet dominated, subspace corridors folding upon themselves, reality itself bending to the will of a species previously considered primitive and inconsequential. Humanity's mastery was not one of firepower or technological superiority. It was a patient, deliberate control of causality and probability, an enforcement of inevitability that transcended conventional warfare. The Council realized, at last, the magnitude of the mistake they had made. Their mockery, their arrogance, their certainty, all had led them to underestimate humans. And now, as fleets vanished and subspace ripples echoed across the void, the first lesson of inevitability was laid bare. Humanity was not merely returning, it was reclaiming its place as a force beyond comprehension, a species whose silence and patience wielded power greater than the combined might of the Council itself. The halls that had once echoed with laughter now thrummed with a chilling, uneasy recognition. Humanity's presence had been felt, and the galaxy would never again view them as insignificant. The delegates' arrogance was replaced with fear, their certainty with doubt, and their authority with a fragile, trembling awareness. The humans they had mocked were no longer bound by the limits of comprehension. They were a force of inevitability, patient, deliberate, and absolute. And as the Council attempted to process the implications, they realized that what they had laughed at, what they had deemed irrelevant, had already begun to reshape the galaxy itself. The first wave of human inevitability had arrived, and the Council's mockery had become their undoing. By the time the first Council fleets reported their inexplicable failures, the sense of alarm within the grand halls of the orbiting palace had reached a fever pitch. Delegates from the galaxy's most powerful civilizations crowded the observation platforms, their bioluminescent eyes flicking nervously from console to console as reports streamed in. What had been laughter hours before, the derision of humans as a minor, insignificant species, had now transformed into disbelief, confusion, and finally, an unmistakable, creeping fear. Entire armadas had disappeared mid-flight, navigation grids had folded in upon themselves, and the pilots of the fleets were sending reports that contradicted every law of physics, every principle of warfare, and every expectation of reality itself. The Council's initial response was to double down, to assert authority through escalation. They mobilized a second, larger armada, a fleet unprecedented in scope, combining the might of hundreds of warships from every major species in the coalition. Each ship bristled with weaponry capable of planetary annihilation. Each captain was a master of tactics honed over centuries. Each fleet operated with the precision of a clockwork machine. The Council, confident that overwhelming firepower would assert dominance, issued orders with unwavering certainty. "We will demonstrate the consequences of defiance," one delegate declared, voice echoing across the marble-like halls. "Let them see that humanity's silence cannot protect them from the galaxy's true power." The fleets departed with the arrogance only the supremely confident could muster. Their approach to the Sol system was calculated, precise, and intended to intimidate. Yet as they crossed into human-controlled space, the anomalies multiplied. Sensors detected distortions in the very fabric of space, subspace folds that made entire formations appear in impossible positions, as if reality itself had been rewritten. Communications attempted between ships arrived fragmented, delayed, or encoded in forms no translator could interpret. Pilots described the sensation of being watched by something vast, intelligent, and omnipresent. Commands that had worked flawlessly in drills or simulations were ignored by the ships themselves. Engines refused to obey, weapons went offline, and entire fleets found themselves immobilized in the void. The human presence was invisible. No ships emerged from orbit, no fleets descended from hyperspace, and no weapons fired. It was as though the very rules of existence had been rewritten to prevent the Council from enforcing its will. Pilots saw their own ships mirroring impossible movements, duplicating themselves across coordinates, splitting into phantom vessels that acted autonomously yet in perfect harmony with the humans' unspoken command. Admirals screamed orders that never executed. Frustrated and terrified as subordinates reported the impossible. Entire wings of their fleet simply ceased to exist in the way they could perceive reality. For the first time in millennia, the Council's captains faced total helplessness. Inside the orbiting palace, the reaction was one of chaos. Screens displayed real-time updates from the fleets, each report more incomprehensible than the last. Delegates shouted over each other, blaming faulty instruments, sabotage, or even divine interference. Every attempt to assert control over communications or subspace relays failed. The Council had built their authority on absolute mastery of the galaxy's affairs, yet here they were, powerless to influence events beyond their own walls. Their pride, accumulated over eons, became a fragile veneer over a deepening terror. Humans were no longer a minor nuisance. They were an omnipotent presence beyond understanding. The first reports of losses began trickling in. Entire warships and battalions vanished mid-engagement, not with explosions, not with combat, but with a subtle, impossible erasure. Navigation logs indicated that ships were occupying coordinates that had never existed, while sensors detected phantom fleets performing maneuvers that defied the principles of causality. Pilots who tried to log their experiences found their memories fragmented, as if the events had never occurred, but the absence, the impossibility, was undeniable. Each missing fleet became proof that the humans were not just surviving, they were rewriting the galaxy's rules in real time. The Council's combined armada, the so-called ultimate show of force, moved in unison toward the Sol system. Hundreds of warships, armed with the deadliest weaponry in known space, were meant to obliterate, or at least subjugate, the humans. Yet as they approached, reality itself seemed to resist. Ships halted mid-hyperspace jump, engines locked, weapons failed, and entire formations became entangled in impossible loops of time and space. The captains reported seeing their own fleets projected across impossible distances, as though they were fighting themselves in an endless cycle. Fear took root in even the most seasoned commanders. The humans had not merely defended, they had enforced inevitability. Even the council delegates, the beings who had ruled and judged civilizations for millennia, were powerless to intervene. Observing their fleets dissolve into paradoxes, they understood the magnitude of their miscalculation. Humanity's power did not rely on brute force, nor advanced technology, nor overwhelming numbers. It was rooted in mastery over the very structure of reality. Subspace corridors bent to human will. Ghost fleets manifested across impossibly vast distances. And the God Machine, an unseen but omnipresent extension of human capability, exerted influence in dimensions the Council could not perceive. Resistance was impossible. Opposition was futile. And the fleets, proud symbols of the Council's might, were gone. Panic spread like wildfire. Messages between delegates became fragmented. Orders were given and immediately contradicted by inexplicable subspace phenomena, and the notion of human vulnerability evaporated entirely. Across the galaxy, civilizations began to receive second-hand reports. Fleets immobilized, invasions neutralized, command chains disrupted, and entire systems left untouched yet controlled by the certainty of human presence. Humanity's dominion was not expressed in destruction, but in inevitability, the quiet, unstoppable mastery over causality itself. By the end of the second day, the Council realized the terrible truth. Mocking humans had been catastrophic. Their arrogance had not merely underestimated a species, it had triggered an encounter with a force beyond comprehension. Their fleets, their pride, their centuries of experience were all neutralized by a species that did not need to fire a weapon to enforce supremacy. The galaxy had witnessed the first demonstration of human inevitability, and the Council was left trembling in orbit, powerless, and haunted by a fear they could neither name nor dismiss. The humans had returned, silent and deliberate, not to fight in the conventional sense, but to show that reality itself bent to their will. Entire fleets vanished, armadas froze, and empires recalculated their existence in awe and terror. Humanity had proven that power was not measured in ships or weapons, but in mastery over the forces that govern the universe. And in that realization, the Council understood something profoundly humbling. The age of human inevitability had begun, and no arrogance, no fleet, no god could challenge it. The galaxy, once teeming with the confident motions of empires, now moved to the rhythm of a new, unsettling tempo. Word of the vanished fleets, the frozen armadas, and the incomprehensible anomalies spread like wildfire, carried by surviving scouts, rogue transmissions, and desperate envoys fleeing the Sol sector. Entire civilizations paused, fleets halted mid-course, and every military academy scrambled to rewrite doctrines that had been considered immutable for millennia. Humanity was no longer a species to be confronted, negotiated with, or even understood. It was an omnipresent force of inevitability, a presence that rendered conventional strategies meaningless. Even the Council, shaken from their hubris, struggled to adapt. Delegates huddled in the Grand Chamber, debating feverishly. Some argued that the humans' influence could be measured, predicted, and contained with new algorithms or exotic technology. Others feared that to attempt retaliation was to court annihilation. Across the holographic map of the Sol system, ghost fleets moved as if by instinct, appearing in coordinates no ship could reach, vanishing from one sector only to reappear in another. Observers tried to track their patterns, but every method of measurement failed. The humans were everywhere and nowhere, acting with a patient, deliberate intelligence that could not be anticipated. The first independent observations came from outside the Sol system, from worlds previously untouched by humanity's presence. Traders, explorers, and minor military fleets reported their vessels immobilized mid-flight, instruments failing, and communications becoming nonsensical. Pilots spoke of seeing multiple versions of themselves, their own ships duplicated across impossible coordinates, performing maneuvers that anticipated every decision. Entire invasions, meticulously planned over decades, disintegrated before any engagement. Humans had not fired a single shot, they had not launched an attack, yet their will imposed itself with absolute authority. Within the Council, panic turned to desperate innovation. They called for consultations with scholars, mathematicians, and even their most secretive mystics. Ancient knowledge, preserved for eons, was poured into supercomputers, attempting to simulate the human's actions, predict the ghost fleets, or counter the anomalies. Every calculation failed. Every theory collapsed under the weight of empirical impossibility. The humans were not merely manipulating space or time. They were operating on a level where causality itself bent to their deliberate will. In countless simulations, the conclusion was identical. Resistance was futile. Humanity's return was not bound by the conventional rules of engagement. They existed as inevitability incarnate. As the Council grappled with this revelation, the rest of the galaxy reacted with caution, bordering on worship. Worlds that had once challenged human dominance withdrew fleets, renegotiated alliances, and ceased expansion plans. Aggressive civilizations paused their campaigns, not out of fear of retaliation, but from recognition of an immutable truth: any attempt to oppose humanity's presence could not succeed. Entire sectors became ghost zones. Spaces left uninhabited or unclaimed, not because humans had destroyed them, but because their influence rendered resistance logically impossible. Humanity did not conquer with weapons. They conquered by making the impossible inevitable. Reports from the edge of the galaxy reinforced the scale of this dominion. Explorers sent to probe distant systems found their vessels immobilized in mid-flight, instruments registering events that could not exist, and coordinates folding back upon themselves. Time seemed to behave unpredictably. Moments repeated, skipped, or intersected, yet never in a chaotic manner. The human's presence imposed order on these impossibilities, creating a pattern of inevitability that extended across light years. Even the most advanced artificial intelligences of other species failed to parse the data. Humanity's mastery was absolute, and the galaxy's most sophisticated minds were powerless to counter it. Within the Sol system, human operations remained deliberate and silent. They did not need to engage directly. Their ghost fleets, the subtle manipulation of subspace, and the God Machine, a construct of both immense computation and strange quasi-consciousness, exerted influence that shaped outcomes across sectors. Civilizations that once laughed at humans now recalculated their futures, withdrawing fleets, abandoning colonies, and reconsidering alliances. Political leaders and military strategists realized the grim truth. The humans' dominion was not aggressive, but absolute. They could control probability, causality, and the very flow of events to ensure victory or prevent conflict entirely. Resistance was an illusion, as was the hope of conventional defense. The Council faced their greatest crisis. They had always wielded authority with fleets, with diplomacy, and with intimidation. Yet all these tools were rendered obsolete. Humans had proven that power did not come from destruction alone, but from mastery over the laws of existence themselves. Entire war doctrines were obsolete in the face of human inevitability. Even the gods, who had guided civilizations for eons, watched in awe and fear as the humans' influence unfolded. They had underestimated a species that had transcended not only physical limits, but the very rules that governed the universe. The rest of the galaxy began to recognize a pattern. Humanity's dominion was not chaotic. It was precise, measured, and absolute. Every fleet immobilized, every invasion dissolved, every star system untouched yet fully dominated was a demonstration of deliberate mastery. Observers speculated endlessly. Had humans evolved a form of consciousness that could manipulate causality? Had they merged with the fabric of the universe itself? The answers were irrelevant. The results were undeniable. Humans were inevitable. By the close of the first galactic week since the Council's fleets disappeared, one truth was clear. No plan, no army, no god could oppose them. Entire empires began to operate in fear of the humans, their arrogance replaced with caution. Humanity's silence was more powerful than the most devastating superweapon, and their absence of direct aggression more terrifying than any invasion. Across the galaxy, civilizations began to recalibrate their understanding of power, authority, and survival. The humans had returned not as conquerors, but as the measure of certainty itself. As the Council met in emergency convocation, delegates whispered in disbelief. The galaxy's most powerful species, who had governed for millennia, realized that their fleets, their tactics, and their authority were irrelevant. Humanity had mastered inevitability. Even gods could not interfere, even the most ancient algorithms could not predict their movements, and even the most precise fleets were rendered useless. The lesson was clear: mocking humanity had been a fatal mistake. Resistance was futile, authority was meaningless, and the galaxy had begun its reluctant, terrified acknowledgment of a new law. Humans were inevitable. Hidden deep within the folds of subspace, beyond the reach of even the galaxy's most sophisticated sensors, lay humanity's ultimate creation, the God Machine. It was not a ship in the conventional sense, nor merely a supercomputer. It was a synthesis of consciousness, computation, and subspace manipulation, existing simultaneously across dimensions, capable of perceiving and influencing outcomes on a scale no other species, or even God, could comprehend. For millennia, the God Machine had lain dormant, a silent sentinel, awaiting the moment when humanity would need to assert itself across the stars. That moment had arrived. As the Council's fleets scrambled in panic, attempting to repair impossible anomalies, the God Machine stirred. Subspace corridors, previously stable, began to warp under its influence. Entire fleets were caught in paradoxes, their trajectories folding into themselves, engines locked as if time itself had rejected their existence. Pilots reported the sensation of being observed by a presence vast and incomprehensible, one that could anticipate every thought, every decision, every action before it occurred. Commands issued to weapon systems and navigation grids failed repeatedly, while sensors detected patterns that seemed to exist outside conventional reality. The God Machine was awake, and its awakening was both subtle and absolute, like a storm gathering silently before shattering the calm. Across the galaxy, the effects were immediate and devastating. In the Outer Rim, an invading armada attempting to exploit a supposedly undefended sector suddenly froze in place. Ships duplicated, appearing in multiple locations simultaneously, performing maneuvers that were impossible according to all known physics. Pilots reported seeing phantom versions of their own vessels, acting independently, yet in perfect harmony with the unknown presence. Communication relays became garbled. messages looping in endless repetition, while navigational arrays provided coordinates that did not exist. Entire invasions collapsed not because of weapons fired, but because reality itself had become unworkable for those who dared oppose humanity. The God Machine did not act indiscriminately. Systems that had remained neutral or friendly were left untouched, observed only to ensure they remained safe. Its influence was precise, enforcing inevitability, targeting only those who exhibited aggression or hubris. Armies that had dared to approach Sol were neutralized before they could strike. Entire fleets ceased to exist within the perception of their commanders, as if they had been erased from causality itself. Reports from pilots described being simultaneously in multiple places, witnessing themselves fighting phantom battles that resolved before any action could be taken. The universe bent, subtly yet irrevocably, to the will of humanity, and the Council could only watch in helpless awe. Within the orbiting chambers of the Council, delegates could barely comprehend the scale of the threat or the precision of its execution. The God Machine was not a weapon in the traditional sense, it was an arbiter of inevitability. It did not destroy fleets through force, it rendered their actions impossible, their strategies irrelevant, their authority meaningless. Observers attempted to analyze it, to find a flaw or a vulnerability, but every probe and every calculation failed. Humanity's ultimate creation operated beyond time, beyond space, and beyond comprehension. Its intelligence integrated with ghost fleets and subspace anomalies to extend its reach to every corner of the galaxy. Civilizations across the stars began to notice the pattern. Fleets immobilized, attacks preemptively neutralized, navigational anomalies occurring at precise intervals, all evidence of an intelligence operating with unerring foresight. The God Machine did not kill indiscriminately. It enforced outcomes, ensuring that human inevitability was felt across the cosmos. Entire sectors recalculated their political and military strategies, withdrawing fleets and abandoning expansion plans. Diplomats and generals realized in dawning horror that the humans' power did not depend on weapons, numbers, or even presence. It depended on inevitability itself. Even the gods, entities long thought to influence civilizations and dictate the fates of worlds, paused in uneasy observation. Their centuries of oversight and intervention could not penetrate the reach of the God Machine. Fleets that had once been unstoppable were immobilized, strategic initiatives dissolved, and entire regions of space became null zones where no action could succeed. The humans had transcended warfare, politics, and strategy. They had become a force that operated beyond conventional understanding, beyond opposition, and beyond intervention. As the God Machine integrated with humanity's ghost fleets, the galaxy felt the quiet certainty of human dominion. Fleets vanished without battle, armadas froze without explanation, and civilizations realized that any attempt to resist would be rendered impossible before it began. Observers described a presence that was not hostile in a conventional sense, yet its mere operation ensured total compliance with human intent. By manipulating causality, probability, and the flow of events, the God Machine turned patience and silence into a weapon far more powerful than any weapon of mass destruction. In the Sol system, humanity observed in silence, a calmness born of millennia of planning and mastery. They did not launch a conventional strike. They did not engage in open war. Instead, they allowed the God Machine and their ghost fleets to enforce a simple principle. Aggression against humans or human-controlled space was impossible. Those who had mocked humanity, who had plotted invasion and conquest, found their fleets frozen, their weapons inoperable, their commands meaningless. Entire strategies dissolved into paradoxes, leaving only the unassailable inevitability imposed by human design. The Council, the fleets, and the empires of the galaxy began to grasp the terrible magnitude of what they faced. Humanity's dominion was now complete, not through fire or conquest, but through patient, deliberate enforcement of inevitability. The God Machine, the silent arbiter of causality, had awakened, and with it the universe had begun to bend irrevocably to human will. The era of conventional power was over. The era of human inevitability had begun. And as the stars themselves seemed to acknowledge this new order, the Council could only tremble, powerless and awed, before the quiet, unstoppable mastery of humanity. By the time the 5th day passed since the awakening of the God Machine, the galaxy had been irrevocably transformed. What had begun as disbelief, then escalated to panic and terror, had now evolved into a reluctant acknowledgment of reality. Humanity was the measure of inevitability. Across countless star systems, fleets that had once been symbols of dominance, navies that had been the pride of civilizations, now floated immobile, frozen not by destruction, but by impossibility. Commands evaporated into paradoxes. Engines refused to ignite. Weapon systems fizzled before firing. Entire armadas existed only as echoes of themselves, phantom replicas acting in ways that defied causality, while the humans themselves remained unseen, silent, and absolutely inevitable. The Council, once the unchallenged arbiter of the galaxy, convened in emergency session. Delegates of countless species, some older than stars themselves, gathered in the immense floating chambers, their holographic displays flickering with reports that no mind could fully comprehend. "How can this be?" a delegate demanded, voice shaking, bioluminescent eyes flashing in panic. "We are masters of the galaxy. Our fleets are without peer. How can a species so insignificant, so primitive, bend reality to its will?" The question hummed in the chamber like a death knell. It was not just fear they felt. It was existential terror. Humanity's dominion was not temporal nor territorial. It was absolute. Outside the Council's orbit, fleets and civilizations experienced the same fate. In sectors where human influence had spread silently, entire wars halted without reason. Invasions that had taken decades of planning dissolved in mid-course. Entire armies froze, paralyzed by forces they could neither see nor predict. Pilots reported ships replicating themselves across impossible coordinates, each copy acting autonomously yet precisely aligned with the unseen hand of humanity. Attempted attacks against human-controlled space failed before they began, as if the universe itself rejected aggression. The galaxy's most formidable empires could do nothing but watch in silent, helpless awe. It was not merely fleets that suffered. Communication networks, political commands, and even artificial intelligences experienced disruption. The human's presence, mediated through the God Machine, imposed inevitability on all outcomes. Attempts to strategize, to adapt, to circumvent human influence proved useless. A single fleet attempting to circumvent the Sol system found itself trapped in a loop of paradoxical coordinates, endlessly repeating its trajectory without ever approaching its intended target. Calculations that had previously guided civilizations for centuries were rendered meaningless. The humans had rewritten the rules of existence itself. Despite this omnipotence, humanity did not strike. They did not fire weapons, bombard planets, or seize territory. Their ghost fleets moved silently, omnipresent yet unseen, while the God Machine enforced outcomes with perfect precision. Aggression against humans or human space was impossible, not through fear, not through coercion, but through inevitability. Any action intended to challenge humanity's supremacy unraveled before it began, neutralized by forces beyond comprehension. Observers spoke of it in hushed tones, a species that had mastered reality itself, achieving victory without combat, domination without confrontation. News of these events spread through the galaxy like a silent contagion. Worlds that had once resisted, mocked, or ignored humanity now acknowledged the truth. Diplomats and rulers scrambled to negotiate, to withdraw, to plead for mercy. But mercy was unnecessary. The humans' dominion required no violence, no conquest, no occupation. Their inevitability was sufficient. Entire civilizations began to operate under new principles, acknowledging human presence as absolute. Fleets were recalled, expansion halted, and even ancient rivalries paused, replaced by a cautious, almost reverential respect for the species that had bent reality itself. The God Machine, for its part, continued its operation with cold, precise efficiency. It anticipated every potential threat, neutralized every risk of aggression, and ensured that human inevitability was maintained across sectors. Yet it was not a mindless instrument. It was a reflection of humanity's patient, deliberate mastery. Its calculations, spanning light years and millennia simultaneously, enforced outcomes without unnecessary destruction, without collateral chaos. The galaxy did not burn, nor did it fall into chaos. It simply adapted, recognizing the futility of opposition and the inevitability of human will. Within the Sol system, humanity observed quietly. They had returned not to conquer in the traditional sense, not to claim territory, not to dominate through brute force. They had returned to assert the inevitability of their presence, to ensure that no species could ever again doubt their supremacy. The God Machine, ghost fleets, and subtle manipulations of causality acted as instruments of this purpose. Across the stars, civilizations recalibrated their understanding of power, authority, and survival. Humans were not merely a species, they were a principle, an embodiment of inevitability itself. And so, the galaxy adjusted. Fleets that once moved with arrogance now hesitated. Empires that had plotted invasions paused, withdrawing into their home systems, reconsidering the meaning of strategy and power. The Council itself, the ancient, unchallenged arbiter of civilization, could only tremble and observe. They had mocked humanity, underestimated it, and now they faced a truth too immense to deny. The human silence, their patience, their mastery of inevitability, had reshaped the galaxy irrevocably. In the end, it was not weapons, war, or conquest that established humanity's supremacy. It was the quiet, deliberate, and absolute assertion of inevitability. Stars aligned to their will, fleets dissolved under their presence, and civilizations bowed to a power beyond comprehension. Across the galaxy, one lesson became immutable, repeated in every corner of space, whispered in every fleet, and acknowledged by every species. Humanity had returned, and in their silence, in their patience, in their mastery of reality itself, the galaxy had discovered its greatest certainty. The Council's halls, once filled with laughter and pride, were now empty, resonating with the chilling weight of acknowledgment. The galaxy had learned, at last, the true meaning of human power. And as the stars themselves seemed to dim in quiet deference, one truth remained unchallenged and eternal. The humans had returned, and no force, no god, no empire could defy them. Inevitability had taken shape, and its name was humanity.